Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, fellow gamer. Welcome to episode 256 of Game Master's Journey. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. On this show, we discuss the craft and the art of game mastering. I've been running RPGs for over 28 years now, and I produce this show in the hopes that you can benefit from my experience, my triumphs, and my mistakes. I've got another great episode for you today. We're going to be cracking open our Dungeon Master's Guide again, returning to our discussion of Chapter 6, Between Adventures, and today we're going to talk about downtime activities. So really looking forward to digging into the DMG again today. We're working our way through the book slowly but surely. And if you're new to the show, first of all, welcome to Game Master's Journey. Thanks so much for listening. This is a continuation of quite an extensive series of episodes I've been doing where I've been going through first the Player's Handbook and now the Dungeon Master's Guide for D&D 5th edition, pretty much page by page, and just discussing it. And I've heard from a lot of you out there who really enjoy these episodes, and especially with, I think the DMG really are often hearing things that either you missed when you read the DMG, or you didn't notice, or maybe you just forgot about, slipped your mind or whatever. And that was kind of one of the ideas behind doing this series, was that there is so much information in these books and so many optional and variant rules and systems that, I mean, frankly, it's probably impossible for anyone to remember all of it. So sometimes it can be nice to have a bit of a refresher and also maybe hear a different point of view on some things. And maybe you'll find some new gems to use in your game. So before we get into the DMG today, I just want to remind you that I have recently revised my D&D supplement, Relics of Power. I have expanded it quite a bit. All of the relics from my D&D campaign, Hinterlands of Elandria / Blood of the Avatars, have been updated and now go all the way to 17th level. So relics are a type of magic item I've come up with for my games that scale in power along with the level of the PCs wielding them. The idea being, instead of having your player characters periodically through their adventuring career kind of quote upgrade their equipment, maybe, you know, swap out a magic sword for a better magic sword, or swap out magic armor for better magic armor, or whatever. Instead of that, you can have the player character have a single item throughout their entire adventuring career. And as the player character gets more powerful, as they gain levels, the item gets more powerful too. So they really never need to upgrade that item to something else, and they can have one item for the whole time if that's what you want or what you're going for. They're also a great way to bring in setting and lore and bring in magic items with history to them and things like that. So this supplement tells you how to create those, how to take existing magic items and convert them into relics, and then give some example relics to get you started. And among those are, again, the relics that my player characters have in my D&D campaign I'm running right now. So when I first put the book out, those only went up to, I don't know, 5th or 7th level or something, because that's where we were at in the campaign, and that's all I'd really developed them up to. But I have recently scaled all those up to 17th level, all the way to 17th level, and have included that in Relics of Power, along with just some revisions and edits and some minor tweaks to some of the mechanics just from play testing that I've done, and just trying to make the supplement as good as it can be. So that's out. So if you buy Relics of Power now, you're going to get the new version with all that new stuff in it. If you bought it before, You also get the new version, and you should have received a website. You should have received an email from my website letting you know that there's a new version to download. If you didn't get that email or you missed it, no worries. Just shoot me an email at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com and let me know, and I can find your original order and send that link to you so you can get the updated version of Relics of Power. Speaking of supplements, my wife and I are also working on a book of player options for D&D, and that is nearly finished. The writing and editing are, I'd say, more than 95% done, and the layout is more than halfway done. So hopefully that will be coming out very soon, hopefully in the next few weeks or so. And finally, I want to send a thank you out to everyone who sent me comments and feedbacks on the last episode, episode 255, when I talked about running a dungeon crawl. And seems like people are really enjoying that episode, which is awesome. I suspected that it would be well received. A lot of us still love dungeon crawls for one reason or another. And yeah, that was a fun episode to do. And I just want to remind all of you that one of the questions from listener GM that we did not answer or address in that episode is, how do you approach a dungeon with high level PCs, like say tier 4, level 17 or higher? And that's something I'd really like to cover on the show as well, but definitely need your help to do so, because I frankly, honestly haven't run for 17th level or higher characters in 5th edition yet. So it would be completely theory for my part, other than experience I have had running for characters at high level in previous editions of the game, specifically 3rd edition. But yeah, that was a while ago. So definitely need lots of feedback and ideas from listener GMs out there if we're going to tackle how do you approach a dungeon for high level characters. I think that'd be a great topic for the show. So if you have ideas or thoughts about that, shoot me an email, gamemastersjourney@gmail.com, or you could call my voicemail if you'd rather leave that in a voice message. And that number is 951-GMJ-LEX-1. All right, so without further ado, let's move on to our discussion of the Dungeon Master's Guide and Downtime. All right, so returning to our discussion of the Dungeon Master's Guide today, we are continuing on in Chapter 6, Between Adventures. And last time, we talked about linking adventures together and campaign tracking and foreshadowing and managing recurring expenses and things like that. And today we're going to talk about downtime. And downtime is a concept that I think has always existed in D&D. This is 5th edition is the first time I've seen it codified to this degree. But it's always been something that's existed in the game, I think. And when we're talking about downtime, we basically mean that downtime is time in the player characters' lives that we're not going to role play or cover directly at the gaming table. We're not going to cover it round by round or scene by scene or anything like that. It's something that we might describe a bit or not. It's time that we're kind of skipping over in the narrative. A great example of downtime from visual media would be the montage. So when you see, the classic training montage in a movie or a TV show, that is downtime. That is showing you a significant amount of time that the character has spent doing something. It's giving you the highlights of what they did and what they accomplished during that time, but it's not, drilling down to being in the experience like other scenes in the movie or TV show do. It's kind of skimming over it really quickly. And so we're doing a very similar thing in D&D and other RPG games when we handle downtime. in one way or another. Now, in previous editions of the game, we did have the idea of downtime, but it wasn't something that we necessarily had mechanics or systems for. It was pretty much in the purview of the dungeon master or the game master, and it was often something that was just kind of hand waved. I've done downtime in past campaigns of mine where I would have days or weeks or months or even years or even decades go by that we're not going to cover at the table, that we're just going to, quote, skip. But usually there's some kind of discussion between the GM and the players as far as, well, what are the highlights of what happened during this time that we're skipping, whether it's a few weeks or a few months or even years. So let's see what the folks writing the Dungeon Master's Guide have to say about downtime activities. The campaign benefits when characters have time between adventures to engage in other activities. Allowing days, weeks, or months to pass between adventures stretches the campaign over a longer period of time and helps to manage the character's level progression, preventing them from gaining too much power too quickly. And really, I think what we're talking about here is just some level of believability. You know, if you look at a D&D character from 1st to 20th level, that is a massive growth in power and capability and knowledge and experience. And, you know, if you run a D&D campaign where you're handling every day, you know, you're not skipping any days, you're not having any downtime, you could easily have first level characters advance all the way to 20th level through dungeon crawls or whatever within a span of a year or even less. And, you know, that doesn't, even in a fantasy setting, you know, we always say, you know, you can get away with a lot in a fantasy setting because of magic. You know, you can kind of hand wave a lot of stuff or not worry about a lot of stuff. But you want some grounding in reality and some believability, and believing that these characters can grow and learn so much in such a short period of time isn't really very believable. And for any players or GMs that are really trying to immerse themselves in the story can kind of be a problem. So, you know, one way that we can kind of handle that without having to slow down the leveling progression to the point that the players are getting bored is just have periods of time that we're not going to cover in the story where the player characters aren't earning so much XP. And, you know, you can have different perspectives on this. You know, and you might look at it like, oh, you know, the player characters go on an adventure and they earn a bunch of XP and they learn a lot and they grow in power. And then maybe they take a couple years off and they don't adventure and they don't earn any XP. They don't grow in power or whatever. That's kind of the more literal interpretation of how downtime would translate in the setting or the world. But another way you could look at it is that the characters are learning and growing all the time. And, you know, our whole system of levels and abilities and whatnot are really just abstractions of that process. And that, you know, if you take a year off for downtime, it's not that the character didn't learn anything during that year or didn't gain any XP necessarily. It's just that we've already handled that mechanically with the last batch of XP they got on the last adventure or whatever. But it's really just a way to smooth out that character progression, have it take longer in the world, so it all makes more sense. Going back to the DMG, allowing characters to pursue side interests between adventures also encourages players to become more invested in the campaign world. And this is probably the second big benefit of downtime, other than just increasing kind of verisimilitude in the game, is getting more engagement with the players into your setting and what's going on. When a character owns a tavern in a village or spends time carousing with the locals, that character's player is more likely to respond to threats to the village and its inhabitants. So yeah, you know, we see a lot of adventures for, you know, beginning adventures for new campaigns, new characters start out in some small town or village, and some threat to that town or village happens. And in order for the adventure to work, the player characters need to care about this threat and want to do something about that. And, with a brand new campaign with brand new characters and maybe brand new players, sometimes that falls a little flat because the players want character motivation for why their characters would care about this threat to this village, or maybe the players aren't just feeling super like they care about the village or motivated to do something about this threat. So one thing that you can do to really help those adventures land is before you present that threat to in some way have the players engage with this town or village or some of the NPCs so that they know it a bit and care about it a bit, and then you introduce the threat. And I saw that in my campaign I've been running, Hinterlands of Elandria. There is a very much loved NPC in my village of Dianara's Rest named Logan, who was a halfling merchant, and the player characters really liked this character. And when the village of Dianara's Rest was threatened, one of the first things that the players brought up was concern about what would happen to Logan. So because the player characters cared about this specific NPC in the town, by extension, they cared more about what happened to the town itself. And they reacted more quickly and more willingly to that threat, I think, than they would have if I wouldn't have had that character of Logan in the town that they like so much. And you can see this in other actual plays that you watch or listen to as well, I'm sure, when the player characters will really latch onto an NPC that they really like or maybe really dislike for some reason. And through that, now they're more invested in the setting that NPC is in. As your campaign progresses, your players' characters will not only become more powerful, but also more influential and invested in the world. They might be inclined to undertake projects that require more time between adventures, such as building and maintaining a stronghold. As the party gains levels, you can add more downtime between adventures to give characters the time they need to pursue such interests. Whereas days or weeks might pass between low-level adventures, the amount of downtime between higher-level adventures might be measured in months or years. And this also very conveniently works well with our discussion of the level progression and how much time that takes, because it does seem like characters have greater leaps and abilities at higher levels when they gain a level than at lower levels. So it fits that as well to have more downtime between levels and have it take more in-world time for each level of experience gained than at lower levels. That all fits together really nicely. So we talked about downtime before in our discussion of the Player's Handbook, and there were some downtime activities mentioned in the Player's Handbook and discussed there. But here in the Dungeon Master's Guide, we have some more downtime activities to add to those already in the Player's Handbook. And the first one we have in here is building a stronghold. And this is a really important one, I think. I remember back in first edition Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, when you had, I think back then we called it the name level, and I think it was 9th or 10th level, where you would start to attract followers. And this was just built into the game. It was something that I think every character class got, that they would attract followers. And it was kind of assumed that at the point you could start attracting followers, that you would have some kind of a stronghold. Either your individual character would have a stronghold, or I think what probably happened more often was your party together would have a stronghold. And that was tied into attracting and maintaining followers. They were tied together. In later editions of the game, specifically in 5th edition, we don't have this, when you look at your abilities you get at different levels, there's not a level where suddenly you just start automatically gaining followers. We do have a leadership feat that you can take to gain followers, but it's not as baked into the system as it used to be. But I think it's still really important, especially for a longer term campaign. Now, if you're running, just a one shot or maybe a shorter campaign or a lower level campaign, you may not need strongholds and followers and things like that. But if you're going to run a campaign for a long period of time and go up into the high levels, then it can really add a lot to your campaign if the player characters have a stronghold and have followers. So if that's something you're interested in, here we've got at least a little bit of information on building and maintaining a stronghold. So it says here that, if a character wants to build a stronghold, that the first thing they need to do is acquire a plot of land. If the land lies within a kingdom or similar domain, the character will need a royal charter, a legal document granting permission to oversee the estate in the name of the crown. They will also need a land grant, which is another legal document bequeathing custody of the land to the character for as long as he or she remains loyal to the crown, or a deed, which is a legal document that serves as proof of ownership. Land can also be acquired by inheritance or other means. These are also, and this might be mentioned here, or if not here, we'll talk about it probably in the chapter on treasure coming up. But these land grants can also be a great reward for finishing a quest or something like that. If the player characters do a significant quest for the king or some other noble, they could get a little plot of land in that person's domain to rule. Royal charters and land grants are usually given by the crown as a reward for faithful service, although they can also be bought. Deeds can be bought or inherited. A small estate might sell for as little as 100 gold pieces or as much as 1,000 gold pieces. A large estate might cost 5,000 gold pieces or more if it can be bought at all. Once the estate is secured, a character needs access to building materials and laborers. The building a stronghold table shows the cost of building the stronghold, including materials and labor, and the amount of time it takes, provided that the character is using downtime to oversee construction. Work can continue while the character is away, but each day the character is away adds 3 days to the construction time. So here we have a chart of different types of strongholds you might have: an abbey, guild hall, keep or small castle, noble estate with a manor, outpost or fort, palace or large castle, temple, fortified tower, or trading post. And we have the construction cost and construction time for each of those. So for instance, a keep or small castle, the construction cost is 50,000 gold and the construction time is 400 days. So yeah, that's pretty much all we're given here for building a stronghold. But that'll get you started. And, again, I think that that's very definitely something that the party can do together as a team and contribute. They're not going to be able to build it faster, obviously, but they can all help contribute to the cost of building and maintaining the stronghold, and they can all benefit from it. Our next downtime activity we have here is carousing, and this one's a lot of fun. Characters can spend their downtime engaged in a variety of hedonistic activities, such as attending parties, binge drinking, gambling, or anything else that helps them cope with the perils they face on their adventures. And this is great because this is something that I feel like especially younger players do like to do anyway, especially if you're having like a beer and pretzels game. They love carousing. So this will actually give you something to do with that as a DM. So, some good or bad things can happen while the player characters are out carousing. So a carousing character spends money as though maintaining a wealthy lifestyle, as discussed in chapter 5 of the player's handbook. And at the end of the period spent carousing, the player rolls percentile dice and adds the character's level, then compares the result to the carousing table to determine what happens. So here are the things that can happen to you while you're carousing. So with a result of 0 to 10, or 1 to 10, I guess I should say, you are jailed for 1d4 days at the end of downtime period on charges of disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace. You can pay a fine of 10 gold pieces to avoid jail time, or you can try to resist arrest. So there you go. That could springboard right into a game session of adventure right there, depending on what the player character decides to do. 11 to 20, You regain consciousness in a strange place with no memory of how you got there, and you have been robbed of 3d6 times 5 gold pieces. There you go. 21 to 30. You make an enemy. This person, business, or organization is now hostile to you. The DM determines the offended party. You decide how you offended them. So again, this is something that could lead to greater things in your campaign. This could spur a whole series of adventures, possibly, depending who this enemy is that the player character has made. 31 to 40, you are caught up in a whirlwind romance. Roll a d20. On a 1 to 5, the romance ends badly. On a 6 to 10, the romance ends amicably. On an 11 to 20, the romance is ongoing. You determine the identity of the love interest subject to your DM's approval. If the romance ends badly, you might gain a new flaw. If it ends well or is ongoing, your new love interest might represent a new bond. So these are referring to the personality traits that we use to flesh out our characters. So that's pretty cool too. And, always look at these things as examples of further things that you can do. That's how I always look at the book for any game that I'm playing or reading or whatever. This Dungeon Master's Guide, everything in here is just a tip of a very large iceberg of what is possible to do in your game. And so, this is showing an example of how something that happens to a player character, whether through something you're actually playing through or through downtime, could affect their personality traits, like their flaw or their bond. So, you can do that at other times, of course, as well, not just from a carousing roll. Roll of 41 to 80, you earn modest winnings from gambling and recuperate your lifestyle expenses for the time spent carousing. 81 to 90, you earn modest winnings from gambling. You recuperate your lifestyle expenses for the time spent carousing and gain 1d20 times 4 gold pieces. And then finally, if you roll 91 or higher, you make a small fortune gambling. You recuperate your lifestyle expenses for the time spent carousing and gain 4d6 times 10 gold pieces. Your carousing becomes the stuff of local legend. So yeah, there you go. I think carousing's a lot of fun. And I won't call out all of these because I won't remember them. But carousing is one of the backgrounds that is revisited in Xanathar's Guide. So I wanted to make sure and mention Xanathar's Guide today. I'm not going to go through the material in Xanathar's Guide on background activities because it would make this episode too long. But if you enjoy using downtime activities and you want more, there's even more discussion of them in Xanathar's Guide. Some of the activities in the player's handbook or the DMG are revisited there and kind of expanded upon or handled in a different way. For instance, carousing is in Xanathar's Guide, as well as the next thing we're going to discuss, which is crafting a magic item. So for those things, you have a few different or a couple different ways you can handle it, depending on if you want to use the method in Xanathar's Guide or you want to use the method in the DMG. Xanathar's Guide also has some new downtime activities and also presents the ideas of rivals to the PCs, which are NPCs who work to thwart what the PCs are doing with their downtime. So an example of that could be if your PCs are running a tavern as a business, as one of their downtime activities, they could have a rival NPC, maybe an NPC who owns a competing tavern who is maybe trying to sabotage their business in some way. So rivals is another way that you can do even more with your downtime and using downtime, not just as a way to explain kind of things that are happening when the story isn't so exciting, things that we're kind of going to gloss over or skip over, but also helping you put things into play that could set up future adventures, future NPCs, future villains, things like that. So really getting the most bang for a buck that we can out of using these downtime activities. So our next downtime activity talked about in the Dungeon Master's Guide is crafting a magic item. Now, I'm not going to go through this in detail. There's quite a bit here about crafting a magic item, but the gist here is this is something that a player character can do if they want to. They can spend time and money crafting magic items. However, it's probably not going to be a great way to make a bunch of money, at least as it's presented here in the Dungeon Master's Guide, because it's not a cheap thing to do to craft a magic item. And the way that magic items are handled as far as buying and selling, which is also here in Downtime Activities, it's not a straightforward thing of going to a store and buying a magic item. It's more a thing of working to find a buyer and negotiating with the buyer and things like that. So it's much more kind of, I don't know what the word would be, much more up to GM prerogative, whether or not you can even sell or buy magic items, what you can sell or buy them for. Same thing with crafting magic items, but at least how things are presented in the DMG, it's not a way to necessarily get rich. Crafting a healing potion isn't going to be a whole lot cheaper than buying a healing potion, especially when you factor in the time that your character is going to have to put into it. So I think it's really more for someone who really just wants to do that with their character, as opposed to this is something that every spellcaster is going to do to make some money on the side. Not so much. So it says the creation of a magic item is a lengthy, expensive task. To start, a character must have a formula that describes the construction of the item. The character must also be a spellcaster with spell slots and must be able to cast any spells that the item can produce. Moreover, the character must meet a level minimum determined by the item's rarity, as shown in the following table. So we have a table here for what it would cost to create an item and the minimum level the character needs to be to do it. And this table is just based on rarity. That's it. So a common item creation cost is 100 gold, minimum level 3rd level. Uncommon item creation cost is 500 gold, minimum level is 3rd level. A rare item creation cost is 5,000 gold, minimum level 6th level. Very rare 50,000 gold, 11th level minimum level. And for a legendary item, it's going to cost you 500,000 gold and you need to be at least 17th level. And it notes that if you're creating a consumable magic item, such as a potion or a scroll, the creation cost is half. So, just to take a very common example, a healing potion, which I believe is common, has a creation cost of 100 gold for a common item, but that's a consumable. So it would be half that, which is 50 gold. So it's going to cost you 50 gold and you need to be 3rd level to create a healing potion. But if you just buy a healing potion from the player's handbook, it's 50 gold. So just showing you there that not necessarily a great way to make money. Actually, now that I think about it, that's probably not the best example because I think there's actually another way. Or wait, no, I'm thinking about Xanathar's Guide. See, it's confusing because we have a different way to make magic items in Xanathar's Guide. And I that's what I use. And I do know I've had player characters create healing potions and I think it costs half. So I think it costs them 25 gold instead of 50. So it costs half the amount to create a healing potion that it does to buy it using that system. But still, I mean, not a great way to get rich. I don't think you're going to get rich a lot faster adventuring, which I'm sure is the idea. So if you're interested in this, there's more here about how long crafting the magic item takes. In a nutshell, it's based on the creation cost. Each day is equal to like 25 gold of that creation cost. So if you're looking at a common item with a creation cost of 100 gold, it's going to take 4 days to make that item. But yeah, so you can look at that. Our next downtime activity is gaining renown. So this is if you're using any kind of factions or organizations in your game that your characters can have renown for, they can spend their downtime gaining more renown. So this is, really dependent on your campaign. There's definitely going to be DMs that would get no use out of this because they don't use factions or organizations or they don't use renown. Or there could be other DMs that would get a lot of use out of this. So for instance, in my campaigns, I have a guild of adventurers that it's assumed player characters are members of, and there are ranks within the guild and higher ranks have more privileges. So If a player character was really wanting to advance in the guild, they could spend downtime gaining renown and doing things for the guild and increasing their reputation with the guild. Another downtime activity we have here is performing sacred rites, which is basically your character between adventures is performing rites at a temple affiliated with a god that they revere. And when they're not doing those rites, they're meditating and praying and things like that. And also, I think part of this would be just helping out the temple, maybe helping clean it or maintain it, things like that. And if you spend at least 10 days doing this, then your character gains inspiration at the start of each day for the next 2d6 days. So that's pretty cool. Another downtime activity is running a business. So adventurers can end up owning businesses that have nothing to do with delving into dungeons or saving the world. A character might inherit a smithy, or the party might be given a parcel of farmland or a tavern as a reward. If they hold on to the business, they might feel obliged to spend time between adventures maintaining the venture and making sure it runs smoothly. A character rolls percentile dice and adds the number of days spent on this downtime activity with a maximum of 30 days, then compares the total to the running a business table to determine what happens. If the character is required to pay cost as a result of rolling on this table but fails to do so, the business begins to fail. For each unpaid debt incurred in this manner, the character takes a -10 penalty to subsequent rolls made on the table. So we have here our table. With a result of 1 to 20, you must pay 1.5 times the business's maintenance costs for each of the days. For a roll of 21 to 30, you must pay the business full maintenance costs for each of those days. 31 to 40, you must pay half the maintenance costs for each day. 41 to 60, the business covers its own costs for each day. 61 to 80, business covers its costs for each day and earns a profit of 1d6 times 5 gold pieces. Roll of 81 to 90, it covers costs and earns a profit of 2d8 times 5 gold pieces. And with a roll of 91 or higher, the business covers costs and earns a profit of 3d10 times 5 gold pieces. Our next downtime activity is selling magic items. And again, as I mentioned before, this isn't as simple as going to your grocery store and buying a magic item or going online and selling or selling an item. So here's how it works. Few people can afford to buy a magic item and fewer still know how to find one. Adventurers are exceptional in this regard due to the nature of their profession. A character who comes into possession of a common, uncommon, rare, or very rare magic item that he or she wants to sell can spend downtime activity searching for a buyer. This activity can be performed only in a city or another location where one can find wealthy individuals interested in buying magic items. So again, this is only possible if you, the DM, say that there's a possibility of them finding a buyer. Depending on your world and where they're at in the world, that may not be possible. Legendary magic items and priceless artifacts can't be sold during downtime. Finding someone to buy such an item can be the substance of an adventure or quest. So for each saleable item, so very rare or less, the character makes a DC 20 intelligence investigation check to find any buyers. Another character can use his or her downtime to assist with the search, granting advantage on the checks. On a failed check, no buyer for the item is found after a search that lasts 10 days. On a successful check, a buyer for the item is found after a number of days based on the item's rarity as shown in the following table. A character can attempt to find buyers for multiple magic items at once. All right, so you can read about that if you're concerned about that. We'll just kind of cover the basics here. So for each of the items that the character wishes to sell, the player rolls percentile dice and consults the table, applying a modifier based on the item's rarity. All right, so we have a saleable magic items table, which gives us the base price of the item, the number of days it takes to find a buyer for the item, and the modifier to their D100 roll to sell it. So common has a base price of 100 gold, takes 1d4 days to find a buyer, and you get a +10 on your roll. Uncommon, base price 500 gold, 1d6 days to find a buyer, and no modifier on the roll. Rare, 5,000 base price in gold, takes 1d8 days to find a buyer, and minus 10 to the roll. Very rare, 50,000 gold piece base price, takes 1d10 days to find a buyer, and a minus 20 on your roll. So once you find a buyer, you roll on the selling a magic item table. And remember, you might have a modifier from the previous table as far as the rarity of the item. And you roll a d100. If you roll 20 or lower, a buyer offering a tenth of the base price is found. So if you're selling a rare item that's worth 5,000 gold base price, you find a buyer that will pay you a tenth of that, which would be 500 gold. If you roll 21 to 40, you find a buyer offering a quarter of the base price and a shady buyer offering half the base price. So I really like this. You're giving the player a choice here, and they can take the easy, quarter of the price, not make as much money, but it's a done deal, or they can get half the price, but they're dealing with a shady buyer, which could lead to some complications and fun. If they roll 81 to 90 on the percentile die, they find a buyer offering the full base price. And if they roll 91 or higher, they find a shady buyer offering 1.5 times the base price, no questions asked. And that is just begging for the DM to do something fun with that. So that's cool. And again, we're not only covering what the player characters are doing during downtime and allowing them to do something that in some way will benefit their character or add to their kind of stake in the world. But we're also possibly getting some story potential out of this too, which I really like. I really like the heavy lifting that Downtime is doing here, doing multiple things for us at the same time. That's awesome. Our next Downtime activity is sowing rumors. Swaying public opinion can be an effective way to bring down a villain or elevate a friend. Now, this is really cool. This is something I'd love to see in a game, probably be a more political game, or this would make it become a more political game. This is something I haven't really seen a player character do in one of my games that I recall. This would be something new for me. Spreading rumors is an efficient, if underhanded, way to accomplish that goal. Well-placed rumors can increase the subject's standing in a community or embroil someone in scandal. A rumor needs to be simple, concrete, and hard to disprove. An effective rumor also has to be believable, playing off what people want to believe about the person in question. Sowing a rumor about an individual or organization requires a number of days depending on the size of the community, as shown in the following table. So a village takes 2d6 days, a town takes 4d6 days, and a city takes 6d6 days. In a town or city, the time spent must be continuous. If the character spreads a rumor for 10 days, disappears on an adventure for another few days, and then returns, the rumor fades away without the benefit of constant repetition. I like that little detail. I like that. The character must spend 1 gold piece per day to cover the cost of drinks, social appearances, and the like. At the end of the time spent sowing the rumor, the character must make a DC 15 charisma, deception, or persuasion check. If the check succeeds, the community's prevailing attitude toward the subject shifts 1 step toward friendly or hostile, as the character wishes. If the check fails, the rumor gains no traction and further attempts to propagate it fail. Shifting a community's general attitude toward a person or organization doesn't affect everyone in the community. Individuals might hold to their own opinions, particularly if they had personal experience in dealing with the subject of the rumors. So that's really cool. And again, it's kind of niche. Not going to see this used in every campaign, but in the right campaign or in the right setting or with the right players or the right characters, this could be a lot of fun. Next, we have training to gain levels. Now, this harkens back to older school editions of D&D. As a variant rule, you can require characters to spend downtime training or studying before they gain the benefits of a new level. If you choose this option, once a character has earned enough experience points to attain a new level, he or she must train for a number of days before gaining any class features associated with the new level. The training time required depends on the level to be gained, as shown in the following table. The training cost is for the total training time. So, for 2nd to 4th level, it takes you 10 days of training and 20 gold pieces to gain the level. 5th to 10th level takes 20 days and 40 gold pieces to gain the level. 11th to 16th level takes 30 days and 60 gold to gain the level. And 17th to 20th level takes 40 days and 80 gold to gain the level. Now, this really adds some verisimilitude to the game. You know, we don't have characters just magically gaining abilities like a video game. When they gain enough XP, they actually have to spend time training and spend some money and things like that. Another great thing about this is it's another vector to bring in some important NPCs, because, you know, if I was using this, I would definitely flesh out the NPC that's training each of my player characters, and they would end up being a pretty important NPC in the campaign because a player character is going to be coming back to them every level to train. Also, you know, there's potential for adventure here, because maybe you have a player character who's a wizard and is training under, you know, say a 10th level wizard, which for, you know, a beginning character, training under a 10th level wizard, that's pretty awesome, right? But once this character achieves 10th level herself, she's going to have to find a new wizard to train her. So that could be an adventure, not only finding a higher level wizard, but then convincing that higher level wizard to spend their valuable time training your character. And then you consider that every character in the party is going to have that issue at some point in the campaign, and you've got a lot of fodder for adventures there. And again, it just adds verisimilitude. And if you use this system, you're going to have a lot of downtime baked into your campaign right away, because every time a character gains level, boom, you've got 10 or more days of downtime right there. Now, I will point out, I think the reason these are in 10-day increments, I mean, part of it's just it's easy math, but I think the reason is the Forgotten Realms, which is kind of the default assumed setting for 5th edition, has a 10-day week. So, you know, I don't think it's going to hurt anything if you're not using the Forgotten Realms and your world has a 7-day week to convert these into weeks. Or in anything else in this discussion where we're talking about how long something takes, usually they're in multiples of 10 days. So if you're in a world that uses a 7-day week, I think it's fine to convert that into multiples of 7 days, or just think about it in terms of weeks. So for instance, this table, training level 2nd to 4th is 10 days. That's 1 week in the Forgotten Realms. So that would be 1 week in, you know, if your world has a 7-day week, then that'd be 7 days instead of 10, if you follow my drift. 5th to 10th level is 20 days, which is 2 weeks. 11th to 16th level is 30 days, which is 3 weeks. 17th to 20th level is 40 days, which is 4 weeks. So this really just depends on how you do or don't conceptualize time in your game. But if it's easier, if you don't use 10-day weeks and it's easier for you to think of these things in terms of weeks, I mean, go for it. I don't think it's going to break your game that your characters are learning things 3 days faster than they would in the Forgotten Realms. If only because every player character is going to be using the same system. So it's going to be equal across the player characters, and NPCs are just whatever the DM tells them to be. They don't train or anything anyway, or do downtime activities. So it's not going to matter. All right. So our final section here in this chapter is creating downtime activities. And really this is where it's at, because even with Xanathar's guide, we don't have every possible downtime activity covered. And just like I think creating backgrounds is a great way to customize your game and make it fit your setting. I think creating downtime activities is another great way to customize your game and make it fit your setting, and also fit the adventure or the story that you're doing right now. Help you to focus in on the themes. So you might have a current or a certain campaign that you're running that maybe there's a lot of focus on creating magic items or buying and selling magic items. You might have another campaign where there's no focus on that. So you can use downtime activities to help kind of laser in that focus on what you want it to be for a given campaign or adventure. So your players might be interested in pursuing downtime activities that aren't covered in this chapter or in the PHB or in Xanathar's guide. And that's another great point too, it might not be your idea to create a downtime activity. It could be a player's idea. Maybe a player wants to do something with their downtime that isn't covered. And yeah, definitely come up with a downtime activity and what the cost of that will be and what the rewards will be. So if you want to invent a new downtime activity, you can think about the following things. An activity should never negate the need or desire for characters to go on adventures. So, when I was talking about selling magic items, I was saying, you're not going to get rich selling magic items and you'd be better off going out and adventuring. And that's as it should be. Because if the way to get rich in your world is to make magic items, why would anyone adventure? Or if the way to get rich is to run in a tavern, why would anyone adventure? So that is something to think about. You don't want to create a downtime activity that's so profitable that the player characters start wondering why their characters would ever go on another adventure and risk their lives again. Why wouldn't they just do this downtime activity and get rich and live like kings? So it's definitely something to think about. Activities that have a monetary cost associated with them provide opportunities for player characters to spend their hard-won treasure. Now, this is something I don't really hear it anymore, but in the early years or the earlier years of 5th edition, I saw a lot of discussion online of, my players don't have anything to do with all their gold and treasure. I don't see that so much anymore. I think because there have always been plenty of things to do with golden treasure. It's just, I don't think maybe they were obvious to some GMs or DMs, or they just didn't think of those things. And there's also been things added to the game in recent years that have given more options for spending money, things like more downtime activities and things like that. So there are more things now than there were, but there've always been plenty of quote money sinks in the game. If you know how to look for them, and if you have players that are interested in that kind of thing. But downtime activities can be another money sink. Activities that reveal new adventure hooks and previously unknown facts about your campaign can help you foreshadow future events and conflicts. So yeah, we talked in the last DMG episode, we talked about foreshadowing, and downtime activities are one vehicle you can use to foreshadow, to introduce new NPCs that are going to become important, to illustrate things about your setting, about your city, about your world, that are going to be relevant or important, things like that. For an activity you expect a character to repeat with variable degrees of success, consider creating a random outcome table modeled on the ones in this chapter. So yeah, that's, come up with a table, going from low to high, less successful attempts to more successful attempts. Think about what this would look like. And there you go. If a character belongs to a class or has a proficiency or background that would make him or her well suited to a particular activity, consider granting a bonus to ability checks made by the character to complete that activity successfully. And of course, the most obvious quote bonus to give them is to give them advantage on the check. So there we go. That's what we have in the DMG on downtime activities. And as I said, there is more discussion of downtime activities in Xanathar's Guide. So if you dig this kind of thing, definitely check out Xanathar's Guide. And just quickly, I'll tell you just a list of the downtime activities that are covered in Xanathar's Guide. So the downtime activities are in Chapter 2 of Xanathar's Guide, Dungeon Master Tools. And again, we have the discussion of rivals, which I mentioned to you. And then the downtime activities that are covered in Xanathar's Guide are buying a magic item, carousing, crafting an item, and that means a normal item, crime, gambling, pit fighting, relaxation, religious service, research, scribing a spell scroll, selling a magic item, training, and work. So in the cases where you have systems for the same downtime activity in multiple places, whether that's Xanathar's Guide in DMG or Xanathar's Guide in Player's Handbook, you would just pick the one you prefer. So far, the ones I've used, I've preferred the ones in Xanathar's Guide, which I've used the crafting magic items in there. So, just to give you an idea real quickly what's in here, they're just more expanded. So, you notice our discussion of each of these activities today was fairly short. in Xanathar's Guide, for instance, buying a magic item, we have complications in here. So we have tables of complications of things that could go wrong or make things more complicated in doing these activities. So some example complications for buying a magic item: the item is a fake, or the item is stolen or cursed by a god. The item's original owner will kill to reclaim it. The item is the center of a dark prophecy. The seller's murdered before the sale. The seller is a devil looking to make a bargain, things like that. I think all of the downtime activities in Xanathar's Guide have the different kinds of complications. If you're interested in that, definitely check it out. And if it's something you want to hear me talk about on the show, let me know. I've definitely considered going through at least parts of the Xanathar's Guide, because there's a lot of great stuff in there, like I've been doing with the Player's Handbook and the DMG. So if that's something you'd like to hear, let me know. And seriously, if you want to hear that, let me know, because whether or not I do that will very much depend on how many people I hear from that want to hear it. Because honestly, these episodes are some of the most work for me to produce. And they're also kind of niche in a way, in that, I don't know that someone that doesn't play D&D is going to be remotely interested in hearing about Xanathar's Guide or the DMG to this level of detail. So I don't want to do them unless a lot of people want to hear them. I don't want to be making episodes that most of the listeners don't care about, or, especially burning a lot of my time on episodes that people don't care about, when I could make episodes that more people care about that take a lot less time to produce. So let me know if you want to hear more about downtime activities, and or you want to hear more about what's in Xanathar's Guide. All right, well, that is going to wrap it up for episode 256 of Game Master's Journey. Hope you enjoyed our discussion of downtime activities and the DMG today. I am hoping to continue this series on the DMG. Our next chapter is chapter 7, Treasure. So this is a meaty chapter. It might take me more than one episode to get through it. There are some things I want to talk about in here. I'm not going to go and discuss all the magic items. So if there's a specific magic item you want to hear about, let me know, because otherwise I'm not really going to talk about specific magic items. But we'll probably talk a little bit about identifying items. Just how do you come up with a treasure if you do it that way using these tables. And then, we might discuss some specific things like spell scrolls, how they work, because they're kind of like a whole class of magic item. And then, we'll skip all of the magic items, actually talking about magic items, which is most of this chapter, really. And then we'll have probably some discussion on sentient items or intelligent magic items, as well as artifacts. And then at the end of this chapter, we have some material that I find really interesting and definitely want to talk about, which is the other rewards, which are supernatural gifts, marks of prestige, and epic boons, which, by the way, marks of prestige, one of those is parcels of land, which I mentioned today, that can be a reward that player characters can get for doing something for a noble or a royal, is a parcel of land that they can then manage and put a structure or whatever on. So those are things I want to cover in chapter 7. But if there's something else in chapter 7 you want to hear about, let me know. There are a lot of great ways you can get a hold of me. You can email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @LexStarWalker. And I also have a voicemail that you can call and leave a voice message. That phone number is 951-GMJ-LEX1. That's 951-465-5391. And also, please join our community on MeWe and Discord. That's a great place to ask questions of myself and or other listener GMs. It's a great place to tell us about your campaign or your player character or a cool magic item you created or anything like that. really, really love it when people post on the communities and share ideas and ask questions and things like that. And I will very often get ideas for future episodes of the show from discussions on our communities. And of course, you can always ask me questions there or weigh in on topics we've talked about on the show there. As you know, if you've listened to any other episodes of the show before, I very often will bring in feedback that I receive from listener GMs about topics that we discuss. So yeah, the more you guys weigh in on this stuff, the better it is for everyone. So you can find links to all those things in the show notes for Game Master's Journey at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to help support Game Master's Journey and what I'm doing here, there are a lot of great ways you can do that. A lot of them won't cost you any money. So even if you're, not rich or don't have money to spare, please check out my support page on the website. There's a lot of things you can do. I have Amazon referral links. So if you ever shop on Amazon, you can use one of those links and I get a kickback and it doesn't cost you anything. There's various places you can review the show. I have t-shirts and other merchandise for sale, and things like that. So you can find all that stuff at starwalkerstudios.com/support, or just click the support link at the bottom of the show notes. And finally, probably the best way that you can keep me going is to purchase my RPG supplements. So I have 2 D&D supplements I put out so far, the Trickster's Labyrinth, which is an adventure, and Relics of Power, which I talked about earlier in the show. And then very soon I will have my Adventures of Primordia supplement coming out, which is going to be all kinds of player options that I've come up with for my games. So yeah, please check that out. And huge thank you to everyone who's bought my supplements and, supported the show in other ways. And a great way to support the show, by the way, is just to tell your friends about it. So yeah, thank you to everyone for everything you do to help me out and keep the show going. So I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I hope you have a chance to run your favorite RPG. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on. All right, time for some downtime. Wonder what I should do for this week of downtime. Maybe I'll do some carousing. That sounds like fun. What could possibly go wrong?
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music, courtesy of Cloudwalker, Transboy, Renfield, Stanko, and Ish. See the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.